Hello everyone. In this session, we are going to discuss about one particular type of passage which is called as the narrative passage, and we'll also see an example. A narrative passage is the passage where there is a story depicted in front of you, and this is usually a personal anecdote or some kind of event where there are characters, where there are people, and the interplay of those people actually lead to some kind of story there. So we will see the characteristics of a narrative passage and then we will see an example. So in a narrative passage, you, uh, so uh, let me start it like this. When you get the SAT test, SAT SAT test, the first test is always a narrative passage, which is like a story. So there would be some kind of story being told there, and you would be. I hope I've shared this. Just give me a moment, please. Now it is shared. I'm sorry. So this is shared now, as you all can see. So the first passage that you're going to get in a SAT passage would always be a narrative passage, as I was telling. And when you get a narrative passage, there are certain things that you are supposed to take care of. The first is that you should try to identify the theme of the passage. Now, what I mean by theme is whether it's a personal story, so where there are some real people involved, or it is some hypothetical depiction of some idea where, let's say, the passage talks about traveling to North Pole in a balloon. So there is one of the tests where the first passage is about how a person traveled to balloon, us traveled to North Pole in a fire balloon. So it's a very philosophical type of passage where they talk about very high ambitions of life and how when we meet a reality, those ambitions are either uh, uh, like when we meet the reality, we get to understand the difference between what is real and what is hypothetical. So basically, it could be a hypothetical story. It could be very philosophical in nature, where there is some underlying theme of human values being depicted, like nostalgia, where we miss our childhood and the naivety of childhood, or it talks about human ambitions. It talks about uh, the purity of heart of children. So, it could be any kind of story there. So, the first passage would always be in the form of a story, and you are supposed to identify the theme. What is the story? Who is the main character? What is his value system? Like, for example, there is a passage where there is an individual who tries to earn as much as possible by taking up different types of jobs, and then he eventually gets a bicycle, a motorcycle, and the whole story flows in that fashion. How this person tries to manage a motorcycle from his boss. So there would be some kind of story. So main character would be there. There would be some value system. There would be some supporting characters or support characters, and they would also have certain value system or certain behavior. There would be certain events happening in this kind of passage where the story flows. Like, for example, it could talk about a shop where a person maintains different types of inks. He sells inks in this shop, and how he's so engrossed in the art and science of drawing with the help of different types of inks and brush strokes. So there are events. There is an inauguration happening there. People are arriving, and eventually, certain value systems of the person are depicted through certain events. So there are events, and you are supposed to identify who is the main character, what is his value system, and why are they talking about a certain event. There are transitions, of course, from introduction to different characters to the interplay of them and some story which happens. It's like a movie. So in a movie, there is an introduction of the characters, then there is an interplay between the characters, and then there is the end of the movie. Sometimes you have to focus on some figures of speech which are shown here, imagery where the things are told in a indirect way, or there is an analogy drawn with different types of characters. Like, for example, a sinister character might be compared with an owl or a cat. So those kind of analogies are there. There's hyperbole. where they try to compare it with something which is much superior or higher in intensity than the said object. There is irony, or there might be euphemism. Euphemism is referring to a character with some easy terminology, or uh, using words which are less offensive. So, so you will have to identify these kind of situations and how the passage is arranged. This would be very clear with the help of some examples. What I want you to remember is that the first passage is always going to be a narrative passage. When you are doing a narrative passage, just try to understand the basic theme. Don't get into the thick of the thin things. And while doing the questions, you can read the story, because as such there is no established structure of the story. It is better to go get the basic idea very very quickly and go straight to the questions, and with reference to questions you can then understand the story. So we'll take an example in the next session of a narrative type of passage, and that will be useful. The point to remember once again is that the first passage in the SAT test would be a narrative passage, and this narrative passage is something which is very unique to SAT. It is not a part of IELTS or TOEFL or PT kind of tests where the content is more academic in nature, in terms of it coming from certain branch of science or history or something of that sort. Whereas in case of SAT, the first passage is narrative, where there are characters, there are real world characters or some imaginary characters, and the interplay of the characters generates some kind of story, gives rise to certain story, and you're supposed to understand the story and answer questions. Thank you so much. In the next session, we are going to see a real narrative passage, and we'll learn the techniques of answering a narrative passage.